Okay, let's talk a little bit more about components. Now, we know what components are in terms of React Native. Those are your basic building blocks that you can make any app out of. So those are things like views, text, images, and so forth. Those are your so-called core components. Those are already built into React Native, and you can use them right out of the box without having to do anything different. But it's often the case that when you're designing an app, especially one that's more complex or sophisticated, you come across a need at some point for something a little bit more powerful than just a text or a view or your basic components. And so the question is, well, what do you do when you come across that need? Do you have to build it from scratch all by yourself? Well, you could try, but that's not a very efficient solution. A better, more efficient solution would be to use what are called libraries. So these are already made bits of code that people have made before you, people who have come across probably the same problem that you have and already come up with a solution. And so they're very generous. People in the programming community are very generous. What they'll often do is they'll make their code available for anybody to use, oftentimes free, and they'll put them in these so-called libraries. So those are import statements at the top of our app code. We import libraries from outside that other people have made that we can use for free. And there are a bunch of these component libraries, these extra more complex components that are available to use beyond just your basic views, text, and images and so forth that are more complex and that fit a specific need. So if you come across something that doesn't quite cut it as far as your basic libraries, your basic components, where do you look? Okay, well, probably the best way to start is let's just do an open search on Google. So I'll search up something, say React Native components. Okay, let's try that. Okay, so if I do that, then, well, like anything else, you have to be kind of selective when you're doing a search because the first thing that comes up may not be the most appropriate thing. So for this example, for example, the first thing that comes up is what we already just looked at. That was just our official React Native documentation. That's just this. So we know about those core components already. So let's look a little further. And here's something that looks interesting. 15 plus React Native component libraries you should know. So if I try that, okay, that looks kind of interesting. So here are some, looks like there's a bunch of these suggested sets of libraries that you can use that have more complex components in them and that you can use oftentimes for free. So let's just take a look. So let's just try the first one on the list. Looks like native base. So if you look at the description, that looks like maybe something that might be kind of interesting. So if you come across something or you have a problem that you can't solve using your basic components, you might try looking elsewhere. So native base. So looks pretty professional. Looks like a pretty well put together site. So looks like something that's going to be well supported. So when you come across something new, oftentimes the best place to start is with the docs. They often have a documentation section on your site. And this is where it gives you all the instructions on how to get started. Okay, so it tells you kind of what they are, and it gives you some sample code often, and it tells you all the things that are available. Okay, now what you probably want to search for is search for the sample code. Okay, I like to search for the sample code because it kind of gives you a template of what to do. Okay, so here's like some sample code. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but if I just kind of look at it, you recognize kind of the basic three-part nature of your app. So we have our imports at the top. Looks like we have our main body in the middle, and doesn't look like there's any styling. But what you want to look for in particular, look for the imports that you're probably going to need to include in your code to pull in the code for the app. So it looks like maybe that. And then inside the main body, look for maybe the stuff that's an example of how to use what you're trying to figure out how to include in your app. Okay, and when you're doing this, when you're incorporating outside code, oftentimes it's going to be a matter of trial and error. You have to try some things. The example they give may not be exactly right for what you want to do, and so that's kind of the fun of it, the problem-solving part. Coding is not just slapping a bunch of different coding snippets together that you copy and paste from the internet. If that's all it were, then you could get a monkey to do that. But what it is problem solving. How do you take what other people have done and adapt it to your particular situation? It may not fit exactly at first, but part of the neat part and part of the fun part is trying to figure out how to make it fit and how to make it work in your scenario. Okay, so if you come across, and most likely you will, because the basic core components are pretty basic. You can build a basic app with them, but if you want to do something that's more sophisticated, unless you want to build everything from scratch yourself, at some point you're probably going to want to pull in some outside libraries to help you. Okay, so hopefully that'll help. Now, every library is different. So I can't sit here and give you, okay, you do this step one, you do this step two, do this step three, and so forth, because everyone's going to be a little different. You're going to find the information about it in slightly different ways, and you're going to include it and incorporate it into your code in slightly different ways. So everything is different. So you just have to try it out and see what happens. If you have trouble figuring out how to get started, let me know, and we'll sit down and we'll take a look at what you want to do. But just know that there are a lot of resources out there that go beyond just the basics. So if you feel stifled by your basic core components, if you feel that that's not enough, don't feel like, okay, that's all there is. I have to just stick to those, because there's a whole world of outside libraries that you can pull from that probably somewhere out there, there's something that fits your needs. Okay, so don't be afraid to go ahead and look.